as well, fusion of the cell membranes to form a common cytoplasm. It's followed by the fusion of the nuclei of the sperm and the egg to form a common diploid nucleus. The thing in fungi, these higher fungi, is that the fusion of the cytoplasm is separated in time and space from the fusion of the nuclei. So the fertilization process is extended, and because it's so extended both in time and space, we refer to it as having two different components: plasmogamy, the fusion of the cytoplasm, and karyogamy, the fusion of the nuclei. And in between those two events, we have what's called a dikaryotic stage, which basically means a two nuclei stage, where the hyphae that are produced following plasmogamy, the fusion of the cytoplasm, each compartment within those, between each septa, adjacent septa, in each one of those hyphal compartments, we have one nucleus from one parent and another nucleus from the other parent. And that's maintained throughout the dikaryotic mycelium. So that's a pretty strange thing to get your head around, but I'm going to show you an example here that hopefully make it a little bit more concrete. And the only life cycle we're going to really focus on in the fungi is sort of typical mushroom life cycle. Remember the Basidiomycota, which is the group that includes the mushrooms. And what's going on in this cartoon is the process that I just showed you in terms of the names of the processes, and here it is actually playing out. So over on the far right, you can see there are two spores. At the top there, you can see a white nucleus and a black nucleus, and those are supposed to denote different mating types, nuclei of different mating types. They're the same ploidy, they're haploid. And those spores, which are haploid, they germinate. Mitoses result in a new organism forming that has one nucleus per fungal compartment, per hyphal compartment. And then at some point, not long after these things have started to grow, they become sexually active, and they start producing pheromones that attract each other if they're of different mating type, and they grow toward each other. And that's basically shown right here, these brown hyphal branches growing out toward each other. And then we have the process of plasmogamy, which is shown here as fusion. And at that point, you can see that we have a new mycelium starting to form here that has two nuclei per compartment, one from each of those parent, a dark one and a white one there. They're not actually color-coded in nature, but just, this is just a heuristic device here. And it starts to grow, and shortly after that, the original haploid hyphae die. And the dikaryotic hyphae, the dikaryotic mycelium, becomes the main fungal body, and this thing can live for centuries potentially in this stage. But along the way, out at the growing edge of the mycelium, like we showed last time with the fairy ring, we start having the production of these fruiting bodies. And on these fruiting bodies, there are specialized regions on the underside of the cap of a mushroom, like the one shown here. There are gills. You probably notice the gills, the little platelets on the underside of the cap of a mushroom, or sometimes in a boletus or something like that, they're pores instead. But this is a real ramification of surface area. It's a huge amount of surface area that's created by the fungus in this way, and along that surface is where we have spore production and release. And that's where the final stage of fertilization occurs, is along the outer surface of those gills. You can see a cutaway there, here at the top center. Right at the tips of hyphae that extend out to the edge of those gills, we have these, you can see those little pendulous blobs hanging off there. The one in brown there says 2N. That's what's called the basidium. That's the club-shaped cell or pedestal-shaped cell in which the final stage of fertilization, karyogamy, occurs. So consider that the original plasmogamy event happened potentially hundreds or even thousands of years prior to, at some point, the fusion of nuclei in the basidium of one of these fruiting bodies. So in time and space, the two elements of fertilization are separated in these higher fungi. So the common name for Basidiomycota are club fungi. The term club isn't based on the shape of mushrooms, but on the shape of that basidium, that terminal hyphal segment where the fusion of the nuclei occur. And basidium, or pedestal, also refers to that same club-shaped structure. So remember in the Ascomycota, the Ascomycetes, the sac fungi, they were called sac fungi because the spores are formed in a translucent sac-like structure. But here, the spores are actually protruded out on these extensions. You can see the four spores that form from meiosis hanging off of those little extensions from the basidium that form during spore formation. So that's diagnostic for a basidiomycete. And then those spores can be released out into the space between those gills and aerially dispersed. So that's the wrinkle and you can see that the only true diploid stage then is the zygote, which is formed in that basidium, and we have meiosis immediately afterwards. All right, so are there any questions about the fungal life cycle before we move on? Okay, so just be sure to have a look at that and think about it in terms of these different stages of sexual reproduction. And we're going to be looking at some other life cycles soon, but not today. Instead, today we're going to finish off the fungi by looking at their importance in ecosystems. We've already talked about mycorrhizae, the importance that fungi have in mutualistic relationships with plants with regard to their roots. That's really important for absorption of nutrients, inorganic nutrients, by plants. And the fungus gets organic substances such as sugars and amino acids from the plant. There's another really important symbiosis that occurs involving fungi that's super widespread and really important ecologically. And this is something called lichens. And lichens have taxonomic names. There are people called lichenologists that study lichens and they classify them. But lichens are not, strictly speaking, organisms. They're really an association between two distantly related organisms, much like the association between fungi and plant roots. But in this case, we have the association between a fungus, which makes up the bulk of the body of the lichen, and a unicellular photosynthetic organism, either a green alga, which we'll get to later in terms of their diversity, or a blue-green bacteria, a cyanobacterium. We've already talked about those a little bit, capable of photosynthesis. And this is a longitudinal section. Basically, actually, it's a longitudinal section right through a crustose lichen. And what you can see is that there's a lot of open airspace in the center of this thing, but the hyphal filaments are very tightly woven on the underside and the upper surface. So in this association, the fungus is getting a really obvious benefit. It's getting photosynthate from the alga. Remember, fungi are heterotrophic. They can't generate food from light energy and inorganic compounds. So they have to get it from other sources, and in this case, the algae can contribute that. But what are the algae getting out of the bargain? And this is a little controversial. Some people think this is a controlled parasitism on the algae. It's not really settled. But we can imagine that these algae can get the benefit of protection being in a semi-moist environment here, and also protection from UV light by the fungus, UV light being potentially very destructive. And they also may get access to inorganic nutrients because the lichen's producing acids, organic acids that break down the substrate on which it occurs, which is a really important point to talk more about in a moment. So there's probably some benefit to the alga, but whether the alga's fitness is really enhanced significantly or whether it might even live better without the fungus under some conditions is debatable still. But in any case, these things can reproduce as a unit. So asexual reproduction, non-sexual reproduction is really common in lichens, and it occurs by the production of what are called ceridia, spelled out there in the upper right of the slide. And ceridia are basically a cluster of hyphae of the fungal component of the association surrounding some of these unicellular photosynthetic organisms, either green alga or blue-green bacteria, and they're widely dispersed in nature. The fungus can also reproduce sexually, and what you see there, the ascocarp of the fungus, is probably not easily visible from the back of the room, but you can check it out on the slides when they're posted. You can see little asci, the sacs of spores that are formed there. So lichens are commonly members of the ascomycetes. There are some basidiomycete lichens as well, but typically they are ascomycetes. There's even a glomeromycete lichen, which is odd, but most of them are higher fungi. So the lichens have a really distinctive morphology. The association between these two organisms creates a distinctive morphology, and these organisms faithfully reproduce in ways that reassociate. Either they stay associated asexually, or after sexual reproduction, the association quickly reforms. And so it really makes sense to classify them as organisms because they do live together pretty faithfully. And they come in basically three flavors. There are three basic morphologies of lichens, and you've no doubt seen these if you've looked around at all in the environment. One type is called the leafy lichens or the foliose lichens, and these are commonly associated with soil, and they're important in soil formation, especially in the case of lichens that are associated with blue-green bacteria, these cyanobacteria, because cyanobacteria, remember, are not only capable of oxygen-generating photosynthesis, but they also are capable of nitrogen fixation, and they're one of the only organisms capable of that group of organisms, along with some other prokaryotes. And so they can be important in soil formation since nitrogen is often limiting in soil. And here you can see these the so-called leafy parts of the lichen body here, and you can tell that this is in part an ascomycete because you can see that's an ascocarp. You see a little depression in the tops of those projected structures. Those are ascocarps. Those are cup fungi fruiting bodies. Another type of lichen are the fruticose ones, which literally means shrubby lichens. And the wolf lichen shown here is a really good example. You've probably seen these on dead or dying trees if you've gone up into the Sierra Nevada. Wolf lichens are really common. There are a lot of other fruticose lichens as well that grow on various types of substrate. And some of the most ecologically extreme types of lichens are the crustose or encrusting lichens that have sort of flaky texture and grow on commonly rock faces and often on inorganic substrates like this, and are one of the more extreme examples among the lichens of organisms involved in primary succession, ecological succession. So lichens are very capable of withstanding really harsh conditions. They can dry out pretty completely. They can desiccate. They can also take a lot of UV light. They're really capable of handling environmental extremes, a lot of freezing stress, heat stress, and they're producing organic acids, as I mentioned, that break down the substrates they occur on. They can also serve as little traps that capture wind-blown sand or sediment or dust in the air, and can result in the buildup of organic substances on inorganic substrates. So they can start the process of ecological succession, ultimately resulting in diverse communities of organisms. So they're really important ecologically. Unfortunately, they also, even though they can handle a lot of really major extremes in the environment, they're super susceptible to air pollution. They do not handle a lot of the components of air pollution that we produce. And so they're really good bioassays of pollution levels. For example, around the LA basin, we have a rich lichen flora that's recorded at the LA County Museum's records, but these lichens no longer exist in that area because they've been wiped out by the bad air pollution in that area. All right, so we already talked a bit about mycorrhizae, which is the normal condition for most plants and probably the primitive condition of association for land plants in general. We have fossil records going back to that time. And this slide's mainly shown to show you a case where we have a conifer species with different individuals here grown with and without mycorrhizal fungi for the same period of time and with the same nutrients and conditions. You can see that the plants without the mycorrhizal fungus did much more poorly. And in many cases, you can't manage to grow the plant without the fungus. But a less commonly appreciated and understood type of association between plants and fungi happens with the leaves, not the roots. And we're just really getting a handle on this now. Nothing was really known about this when I was taking botany, but it's a relatively recent understanding, and partly has to do with the fact that the fungi involved are microscopic. They actually, the spores of the fungus invade the plant leaves through the pores in the leaves. So plants have to exchange, have to be able to take in carbon dioxide through their leaves in order to undergo photosynthesis. And they have pores in their leaves that allow that to occur. They're called stomata, and we'll look at their structure later. But the fungi can enter through those spores, through those pores as spores, and then they can germinate inside the leaf. And it turns out that this is a ubiquitous relationship. This happens across plants in general. Where they've been looked for, they've been found. These fungi are everywhere associated with plants, and they appear to protect the plants. They provide a home. The leaves provide a home and nutrients for the fungus, but the fungus, in turn, appears to be able to produce compounds such as alkaloids that protect the plant against pathogens, pathogenic organisms, disease-causing organisms, and also, to some extent, particularly documented in grasses, the compounds produced by the fungal member of this partnership can protect the plant from herbivory by larger animals, by animals, etc. So this is a great case where, and also there's some evidence that these fungi can protect the plant against the physical environmental extremes seen in nature as well. And it's been studied to some extent in the cacao plant from which chocolate is derived. And pretty clearly there, the presence of the endophytic fungus is really important to protect the plant against pathogens. So we really rely on these endophytic fungi for the success of plants in general. And it's been shown in particular here with plants from which we get chocolate. All right, so we already talked about fungi as decomposers, but there's one more thing to mention about that that's really important. And that is that certain fungi, such as the shelf fungus shown here on this rotting log, are particularly adept at breaking down the components of wood, such as cellulose, which is basically the constituent of cell walls of all higher plants. But more importantly, is that in wood itself, in woody plants, the cell walls are impregnated with a substance called lignin. And it's a very complex molecule, a carbohydrate, that imparts the strength of wood and also imparts decay resistance. So if it wasn't for these wood decaying fungi, the environment would pretty quickly become so littered with dead wood that the carbon cycle would fail. So it would be the reverse of the current situation where we're putting all the carbon into the atmosphere. All the carbon would be going into the dead matter that was unavailable to other organisms, and we'd have the reverse of global warming. And this actually happened back in the Carboniferous when the environment became so acidic in these old swamp forests of the Carboniferous that fungi couldn't survive under those conditions, and we had the buildup of so much dead wood that it created our coal deposits worldwide that we have today, and a major climate change ensued as well. Okay, so we're going to just finish off next time with fungi as pathogens and then move on to algae. So enjoy the holiday.